Morning. Alrighty. So, y'all, this is a forecast. I am now like a mental health meteorologist. No, I'm just kidding. I wanted to just talk a little bit more about um, really what's going on in the state of. Let me get this started. What's going on in the state of mental health and addictions land. So let me see here. So yeah, okay, here we go. We're live on Instagram. I have a poor connection, but I don't. So let's get it together here. So doing a little bit of a mental health addiction forecast, because if you're not working in this field, and even if you are working in this field, and when I say working in this field, I mean like the therapeutic service space. Doesn't matter what role you have, whether you're licensed, certified, peer support, or just volunteering. They're heating up. And so I just really wanted to put this out there as like what's happening in the mental health and addiction world, because if you're overwhelmed by it, it makes complete sense. Like I'm overwhelmed by it given I also work in it, but then I also have, I have to keep an outlook on what's going to happen coming up. I can't tell the future, but the best thing about probabilities and preparation is that you have to be prepared for the future. So a little bit of a breakdown. It's going to be gloomy with a chance of rain, a lot of storms, but there are clear skies coming, hopefully. And here is the thing, is that I keep hope. I have to be careful about not having rosy-colored glass or too rosy-colored glasses on for the timing and the expectation of when the turnaround is going to be. But the thing about it is I see people enter into recovery every single day. It's my own hope that is because I have turned around my life from, and if you guys know me, my name is Sara. Obviously, if you're watching on Facebook and Instagram, Facebook and YouTube, you can see a little bit more of my background and my credentials. But if you don't know, like I was never necessarily a drug addict. I've worked with people who have struggled with alcohol, drug, substance use disorders for about the last 10 years of my career. But for me, like when it comes to my educational background, learning about addiction science, and then also seeing the addictive pattern in my own life, recovery I know is possible. However, it is a day by day, sometimes second by second or minute by minute transition that you have to wrap your brain around. And that takes a while. So that's why I said, yes, the forecast for mental health and addiction, I do think it's going to have it's going to get worse before it gets better. But also the other reason I know that is because anytime anyone else starts therapy, that's nothing really sometimes related to substances. It's literally written in our consent to treat in an agreement, in a consensual agreement between client and therapist, that it's very possible that the waters will get rough because you're starting to pay attention to the stuff that you've not been paying attention to. And then also learning about how to do and handle those things that you've been avoiding, sometimes with substances, sometimes by just watching television. So there is a trend that it's going to get worse, quote unquote, before it gets better from an individual recovery standpoint. And I feel pretty confident with being able to generalize that statement into the bigger space. It's going to get rocky. Right now, addiction treatment, as well as just the toll on society, I believe is about $3.5 trillion contribution to the debt. And that's because people can't hold sustainable jobs. They can't contribute to, their households. They can't figure out how to get up out of bed without having to use a substance. And ultimately it causes impact for other people in that network. Now, today, I really don't want to focus much on like why people with addiction or mental health issues are the problem, because they're not. They're not the problem. The problem is multifaceted. The problem is never just one thing. And so that's where like a lot of why I go live and why I talk about mental health and addiction is because it is everyone's responsibility to contribute to the solution. And so this is where, Yeah, I know. I've got plenty of experience with working with people, helping them engage in recovery because they need it. I talk to them every day. The people I really want to talk to today are the people who are support people for those people struggling. Family members who have had to throw their hands up and kind of just walk away or distance themselves, put some boundaries in place for that relationship because it's very taxing, it's very unhealthy. Why I want to speak to y'all today is because it's honestly, it's just going to be, I'm going to keep it real with you. You're just as much of a contributor to the problem of someone struggling with addiction than you are not. And it doesn't mean that you didn't have any good faith or goodwill in trying to support them and that you haven't done anything. I say that because a lot of it is about systems. You are a part of the system that just this person is the one who's presenting with the problem of mental health and addiction. Why is this? But you too have been affected by it. So if you're not mindful of the exposure to someone who's suffering and actively playing out trauma patterns and self-defeating and self-sabotage patterns, then you're naturally distracted from the answer to how you recover from that, which is yourself. And so when I talk about how I support providers, yes, I primarily work with healthcare providers, not just with substance addiction, but this is where I work with them on recovery, right? Remember, like we've got different phases of treatment. I'm on the side of helping people figure out the lifestyle of recovery. How do you make change and maintain? And so I commonly work with the people around the person who is struggling with that addiction or that mental health issue. And they need just as much help to change to allow the person who's recovering to change. And partly that is because of really just the underlying contributing factor to everyone's existence. And that is, how do you manage codependency? How do you, provide someone support and create the space in your mind to not support them the way that you want to support them and the way that they need support with limitations, of course. So that dynamic of codependency is in every human. Yes, Maisie, I think you agree. You want an example, just pausing real quick on that rant, an example of addiction and just how quick it is. I give you the laser pointer. So most of y'all, if you follow me, you know that I'm a cat mom. Y'all can't see her. You may have been able to hear her, but this thing I bought only a month ago. And my cat, Maisie, she sits right here. She's like staring at me. I wish y'all could see her, but I can't get my camera. I guess I can get it on Instagram. She is right there knowing that the laser pointer is in my hand. So every morning now, because she's now associated the little red dot with mom in the bathroom and mom standing at this desk. And because I started playing with her and trying to be more intentional about building that relationship with her, because she sits here and listens to me talk all day and experiences just as much stress as I do, that I have to play with her. That's my coping skill. It's her coping skill as well. So, but she literally demands it. She is a fiend for the little red dot, y'all. So it is not just a substance. So whenever we culturally get over that barrier of stigma, and really that is switching to a courage mindset of have the tough conversations about the things that really make you uncomfortable. Or if you're that person who has those conversations with people, you got to remember that people's discomfort is not yours. And you have to, there's that transfer of energy, because if not, you're going to hold on to more stress and ultimately start coping with things to distract yourself. And you're going to be missing your own addictive pattern in itself. So let me get back to what I was saying. So that's just how fast an addiction can form, feline version. It's really just a matter of having the right amount of stress, the right amount of distraction, and then the right amount of mindlessness, where an unhealthy, unprotective pattern starts to form, and then addiction can take hold. Because addiction has nothing to do, now the substance addictions do have like an extra whammy. They have just immediate gratification for relief and all that. But it is a pattern, and it has nothing to do as a neurochemical reaction in your brain that you can't control because it's already predestined to try to protect you. So you really just have to understand how it works, which is a lot of what my programs are about, but then also just how to be mindful of it, because you can't stop it. It's natural human deviancy. And if it wasn't exacerbated by the BS that we got going on at all-time high right now, then it would still find its way into our normal human routine, right? So we're not preventing addiction, because if addiction didn't exist, recovery wouldn't exist, and we wouldn't be able to find our way. But let me get back to the point here. So if you are that support person of someone who is either entering into recovery or not even in recovery right yet, you have your own work to do. And so that's where I really wanted to make sure I spoke to y'all today. This is not really a how do you do that conversation today. It's more of a, this is an important thing for y'all to consider, because it's just as important for other people to, yes, get off drugs, find happiness, work on themselves. But what's going to happen to you when they do that? What's going to happen to your role in their life when they start to actually address their own needs and you're not rescuing them or persecuting them? Because that's usually what ends up happening. So if you take a look at it from, if you really, really got to Google something, Google family systems, or of course, I'm going to forget the actual clinical theory that I'm trained in. Internal family systems, excuse me, brain fart. If you Google internal family systems theory, you'll find, hopefully, probably some really lingo heavy material. But let me break it down for you in a nutshell. It means that if you have a mom, a dad, and a child, and that child grows up, those parental roles start to change. That's the simplest form of what is that we as families, we're systems. We all have roles within those systems. Then we start to develop personalities around those roles. And so when that happens and something starts to deviate from what said plan of one other person's expectation of those roles should be, it puts strain on the family system. So doesn't matter what it is. It could be that someone's not using drugs at all, or someone's not, in a mental health crisis at all, but they're just pursuing a different direction than their parents would have wanted them. Puts strain, increases the chance for someone to need to cope, because that pressure, as sober as I am, which I can't really say I'm that sober, is because I've had my Dunkin' this morning. My caffeine keeps me somewhat mellowed out. I still feel a pressure, because I'm a human in this world. And if you're just trying to ignore the pressure that's there, then you're going to cause an imbalance in yourself. I just read some, I don't really talk about stats much, but I just saw this one yesterday. Am I going to remember it? It was, so on average, a lot of neuroscientists find that the chemical reaction refractory period of emotional experience, so basically the neurochemicals that get released after having just one emotional experience, positive and or negative, if you can cut off the emotional experience, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but if you experience it and you cope with it, there's still a 5-minute refractory period of neurochemical release after that experience, let alone if you have any attachment to the event that caused you an emotional reaction. So really, if you're not coping well, if you're not honoring that event or that emotional experience or that use of energy or experience of energy that comes naturally as a human, then you can ultimately just in 1 minute delay yourself up to 5 minutes of experiencing potential cortisol overload. Then that increases your adrenaline, that throws off norepinephrine, and then it also impacts your serotonin development, which is like your happy hormone for your brain. What's what SSRIs are trying to help your brain kind of reignite their relationship with, is now compromised because your brain is mostly in your gut. And 90% of serotonin is made in the gut. So therefore, and cortisol is released in the gut, just a stress hormone. So if your cortisol being released in the gut is happening more consistently, then your serotonin can upkeep or production can happen, because then your relationship with food and health is generally just not promoting serotonin development. Yeah, I just stressed myself out too. Now, all jokes aside, I stress myself out, but I also know that I live a lifestyle now that is preventative for how that gets too far away from me. Now, considering that I am in a grieving period of my life, and I am, so November 17th, put my 14-year-old cat down. He pretty much raised me. This year has been a whole grieving year for me. Today, of all days, is my father's birthday. He would be 69 years old if he hadn't passed away 19 years ago. And so all of that emotion, because I don't resist it anymore, reduces less cortisol in theory, because I can't technically prove it. Y'all can't like put an x-ray in front of my gut and be like, oh yeah, cortisol production is lower at this point in time. But because I do not resist those emotions anymore, because I know how to manage them and bring them into my narrative and use them for my general energy in life, I naturally have protective factors built into my lifestyle where I don't have to be so all in on, okay, I got to relax, I got to decompress, I got to do this, I got to do that. And so that's really where I think a lot of people, that's ultimately what I help people with, is I build that lifestyle. You don't have to do big changes. You just have to be prepared enough to know what's about to happen. So then that way you can mitigate it as best you can. Other than that, everything else is out of your control. And so there you got to reestablish a faith as well. All right, so I've just been winging it so far. Let me look at my notes to make sure. Yeah, so we talked a little bit about family systems. So really, like, take a look into family systems and just wrap your head around, like, okay, well, if I have a person, a loved one, who is experiencing substance use, one, that's stressful in you. Again, it's all about you. You cannot help them if you do not help yourself. Trust me, I've tried. I've thrown money at people. I have thrown myself, not like in many different ways, but we'll stay focused on the therapeutic ways, is that I have put myself in my relationships to be there 100% for other people when they need me, but it still doesn't change the fact that they have to take accountability for some aspect of the small changes that need to be made over time. And so I've come to now, my philosophy when I help people recover is, and then in helping their families recover, is you have to do the work very individually. Then you have to have a group and component, a family structure component, because you have to understand that when an addict or any kind of substance user or mental health client starts to recover, it's going to be a different version of themselves. That is a new person developing. And it's everything that you want, especially if you're a parent, it's everything that you want to see. You want them to do well. You want them to, but sometimes the people are like, well, why aren't you happy for me? It's because the person never realized, the supportive person never realized they have to do their own work to keep up, or you're going to lose that relationship. When I started my journey just with my own food patterns, my food addiction, I've lost, counting TJ, which is unfortunately, it wasn't a loss in terms of a friendship because he actually died, but I've lost very long-term friendships out of just taking care of myself because those friendships served a previous version of me. I'm still the same person. I would still be open to those relationships, but I know they're not necessarily able to be had if the other person and I are just not on the same page with how and what it is recovery looks like. Now we don't need to go into my business in that regard. But these are just some of those like little hidden nuances of why recovery is so difficult, not only for the person recovering, but for the support system around them. The family has to do their own work. And it's not doesn't mean you just have to go to therapy. It's more about doing your own reflection, being intentional about what type of relationship you want to have with the recovering person. And what things you have to recover from, because this is where we can't really get to this conversation yet, but if anyone wants to have this conversation with me in a recorded fashion, is that, again, what I said earlier is addiction is not just to substances, it's process addictions. And now, given we have this whole day and age of technology, and I'm going to move into the speaking more of the mental health side of, we have a mental health crisis going on. It's been going on for a lot longer than we probably all realized, because it's very covert. We have the overt view of addiction and mental health. So we see those severe and persistent mental illness, all the media hypes up all the weird people doing weird things out there. That is mental illness. That is people not taking care of themselves and people taking care of people, because you wouldn't be filming someone having a mental health crisis if you actually realized it was a mental health crisis, because that's just, you fill in the blank. I was going to say shameful, not just to the person, but it's a shameful situation for that person to be filmed in a very vulnerable moment. So there's me communicating my disappointment about the general public media these days. We make fun of what mental health is as a protective factor for our own egos. And I've done it too. I still do it sometimes, and I have to call myself on it whenever I make a joke, when I really need to be talking about to myself, not to anyone else, to myself, about oh man, this is actually a really disappointing situation, and I'm laughing to make it feel better. And I literally help people recover that way. So for when I'm checked out of a session and I check back into my life, I have to be very careful about how fun I make my healing process, because not all of it is very fun. It's not fun. It's not fun to miss anyone, and it's not fun to think about them not being here, but it's also necessary for everyone to get closer to being on the same page, to let some of this really big backlog of relationship traumas and generational traumas to rebalance and recorrect itself. That's why my hope still stays alive. Because not only I see people making those efforts, I've made my own efforts to do that. Everyone has to take their own individual responsibility to try to just be a better version of yourself every day. Doesn't mean you're going to see light years of change, but is that if you feel like you did something that you're shameful about today, making sure that you are not in line to do it again in the next however many days, the next day, and address the shame, because that is the driving factor of this. Stigma is just shame. It's internalized shame, where we can't talk about something because it causes you more discomfort than the actual situation is calling for. And that happens in so many different contexts. And that is really part of the problem, is that, I was having a conversation with a client, for just as an example. Well, actually, they don't have a great healthy relationship with substances, but they don't have a very traumatic past when it comes to relationships, loss, all of that. So they've been working with me for 2 or 3 years, and they're at this point now where they're trying to enter into new relationships and kind of correct some of those old reactions and find new responses for them. And it's I put it on different levels. It's like once you learn a lesson, you got a different lesson on a different level coming to you, as well as the other lessons that you've passed the test for, to continue to see if you'll continue passing the test. But they're in this relationship where that when it comes to intimacy, where they're trying to be intentional about intimacy and determine whether or not their partner is someone healthy for that intimacy growth. And they said to me yesterday, I really messed up. I hurt their feelings. I really shouldn't have said that. And when we unpacked it a little bit, I gave them the accountability that yes, there was a degree they messed up. They said something without consideration to how it would make them feel. But here's the thing, where you have to consider other people, but then you also have to make sure you consider yourself, because if you're stifling your voice in any regard where your true emotional needs and security lies, then you're still living out that pattern of codependency and thinking your needs are not as important as other person's of overt emotional expression. By all means, you can be supportive of someone's emotions and them being emotional, while also having room for your experience and your emotions as well to be uncomfortable. Now, you have to be considerate to timing. And when you talk about how you can't shut someone down for having their experience just because you have to have your experience, if theirs takes more precedence in that moment, yours will take precedence when they're validated in their moment. We just don't do that. Not everyone. There's a lot of people who do, but I can tell you on social media, we're not promoting that. I can tell you in public, I see it everywhere. If I just sit back and watch, because I love to people watch, when you have a coffee, one of the best things to do is that you just watch where people take up more room with their own experience and don't allow the other person to have any experience. That is what you want to be on the lookout for, that degree of narcissism. We all have some narcissistic traits, but if someone else cannot let you have an experience in related to the same moment of their experience, pay attention to that. That's a very delicate situation. You want to, that can grow into something a lot more extreme very quickly if it's not already a covert extreme situation and they're just masking. Because most of the people when we say masking, it's more about not being in a vulnerable state where they can show up in themselves, and if they even aren't accepted, that they're still going to be okay. We put masks on because we have like different identities, but then it's hard to know which identity you're actually in and experiencing that vulnerability unless it takes practice, unless you take the time to practice. I'm getting away from my main point here, which is I want to talk to those people who are providers of support for people struggling. Because the thing is we have a whole new generation. So I'm going to hit my third point here about the mental health forecast. We have a whole younger generation coming into and who knows about mental health, which I think is great. But there's still, in my opinion, clinical and professional, or personal and professional, I do not think that they're equipped with the correct information to actually do something about the mental health crisis that they're experiencing. We are oversaturated at this point with identifying that there's a problem. Where we're lacking is people understanding and putting action towards doing something in their lives to contribute to the solution. And that happens. There's solutions at every different level, micro, meso, and macro. If you're not the lobbyist that goes out and trying to change policies and systems, then don't force yourself to be that. If you're not the person who can go to protest because of your own mental health, then don't force yourself to be that. But consider how you doing your own work of recovery and not just staying stuck in anxiety, staying stuck in freeze mode, staying stuck. I don't know how many times I gotta say, if you're stuck, you're stuck. You know when you're stuck. And if you're willing to acknowledge, like, okay, yeah, I feel a little stuck, that's where you need some perspective. You need someone who can not only, and I'm not trying to advocate for myself here, but any person that's trusted and who can be as objective as possible to give you a perspective that potentially could give you something else to try. And when it comes to supporting people who are who are the primary mental health substance abuse addicted person in their families, you guys, the family is where recovery and resolution needs to happen, because that person that you love so much cannot be long-term sustainably changed if their family, if of origin. Now, it doesn't mean that they will all change, but if you're willing to do something to support this person recovering, you have to do the work yourself. You have to consider going to Al-Anon. You have to consider going to Alateen. You have to consider going to Codependence Anonymous. You have to consider signing up for my program so I can give you the knowledge that you need to know to be able to make it through the real long-term process of recovery and maintenance for your loved one, because it's going to require you to be just as uncomfortable as they are. It's going to require you not rushing in to be like, oh, let me help you. You're homeless. I can put you up in a hotel. I've done that for people. It doesn't change the situation. It doesn't. I wish it would. It hurts my heart that it didn't. But fundamentally, it needs to happen in all aspects of you being uncomfortable, knowing that it's going to be uncomfortable to watch this person go through suffering. If you've ever watched a person detox off of opiates and any other kind of drugs, whew, it's very uncomfortable. Especially if you're like, and most people are empaths. Most people just don't know how to have boundaries with their own emotions. So it basically, this is where, in my philosophy, this is where narcissists form. The personality disorder narcissist is that they were born empaths. They weren't protected because no one really knows about boundaries. It's a new age concept. And also the emotional intellectual boundaries, they're invisible. You can't see them. You can, but we'll talk about that another time. But physically, you just cannot see them. And they're exposed to trauma. They're exposed to energy, to tension. They're exposed to neglect. And then it just gets worse and worse and worse. And this is like, can happen in the first 2 weeks of, a healthy, quote unquote, healthy baby's life, a middle-class, stable family. But if that mother is experiencing, and most mothers will experience a degree of postpartum, because all that just means is the hormonal fluctuation after giving birth. It's a fluctuation from that point, and that mother is the sole source of providing support for that child. And it starts early. No, you're not a failure if you have an addiction or a child that struggles with addiction. You can't be perfect. But I just want to let you know this way out of your control. So you have to focus on what you can control, which is you, which is your mindset, which is how you support this person finding their own balance moving forward. That goes for, you take the addiction part off of it and just focus on mental health, especially youth these days. Anxiety, depression. If you're not, as a parent, paying attention to your own stress, your own anxiety, your own physical health, mental health, then you can't support as much as you want to. You cannot support your loved one in recovery. You can do small things by getting them to appointments, I'm sure, but like the relationship is where the sustainability is. And if you do not have a healthy relationship with yourself, you cannot promote a healthy relationship with other people in your life. Well, you know what? Given that I can't tell the future, let me rephrase that. You are going to be less likely to have healthier relationships with other people. I don't want to put any barriers just in my language and how people can accomplish becoming healthier. But I also want to be mindful that like the self-development process is tricky because every day your body changes. It's a matter of keeping up with it. It's a matter of learning how you operate. So therefore, not only can you educate other people about how they operate, but you can also accept them where they are in operating. Okay. Yeah. So that's my best stab at a mental health and addiction forecast. So in summary, gloomy with periodic breaks in the clouds for sun and then immediate rain. Gloomy again, but long-term, I think we're looking at a really good prognosis, but it will depend on people really buckling down in your own life and avoiding less. You're not going to take on everything in one day. I promise you. Like, if you saw my desk, there ain't no way I'm tackling all the things that stress me out. But if you asked me 6 years ago, where I wasn't even really started, I've been like, no, I can't do it. I was avoiding. And I still have little patterns of avoided behavior. A lot of, too, it's avoidance is not fully bad, but it will wreak havoc if you don't keep an eye on it. Just like a little baby, a little toddler. If you don't keep an eye on that, you're going to have crayon on your walls. And then you're going to have more work ahead of you to repaint the walls or have to deal with an apartment complex to get the wall painted, in metaphorical terms. So please be mindful that there are programs, there are barriers to some people getting help, but if you're met with one, please ask. And I'll volunteer myself here. Ask me. I will take the time to figure out how you can get access to the resources that are out there, because sometimes it's not that they don't exist. It's just that you don't know about them. Not everyone knows. It's not your job to know about the programs out there. It's not your job. If you work in sales and of like tire sales, it's very unlikely you're going to know about sober living. It's very unlikely you're going to know about the state-funded programs to help people get mental health and substance abuse treatment. That's why social workers rule. Cheers. So, that's my forecast. Buckle up. It is a rocky ride. If you don't like roller coasters, well, then I can see why there's mental health crisis, because it's not fun. Although I love roller coasters, I guess that's maybe why I am so resilient in this particular profession, is because I have understood the ups and downs of what this lifestyle is. And when I say lifestyle, I mean it's also life. Like, I didn't choose for my father to not be here on his 69th birthday. The universe, God, chose that. And if I was not, and I wasn't paying attention because I was stuck. That was why food became my coping skill. If you don't get unstuck little by little, then you won't. But it's little by little every day. And it's possible. It's possible. So if you guys need any help, obviously, check out my website. I'll also put up and remind you I have an app which is slowly helping you guys do the work. One little thing a day, one little thing every other day. I don't care. Doing something within my resource library will bring you to a different worldview, a different perspective of your life. And if you need more intensive help because you want to put the investment of time and energy and a little bit of money, because it costs money to be in a capitalist society that causes harm and mental health issues, but it's reasonable, you'll actually save more money in the long run to do the work, to do the intensive work, if you really want financial security in the future. So I'm gonna go finish my coffee and keep on working to make this information accessible to people and figure out how I can help people at any given point of where they are. So I hope you guys have a great Friday. Thank you for tuning in to my mental health and addiction forecast. I'm not really, meteorology is just not my thing. I do love rainy days, but I also really like sunny days. So that's why we gotta be prepared for both. So I will see you next Friday doing my lives. I don't know what the topic will be yet, but it will be something recovery related. So have a good day, guys.